You can see that our research priorities are driven by three objectives. First of all, to provide evidence-based to support strategic policy development and program monitoring and evaluation. Secondly, to enhance CIC's intellectual capital and knowledge base for the systematic application of evidence-based analysis and research and data tools. And finally, to meet CIC's data sharing and reporting service commitments to internal and external partners and stakeholders, including the Canadian public. Now, how are we organized? On the research side, as opposed to the evaluation side, there are three main divisions. And the first division is what's called data management and reporting. And it's responsible for the data integrity function in the department. So there's a whole unit that ensures that all the data is included in external releases and all sorts of materials is accurate and reliable, and this is actually more of a challenge than it sounds, since depending on what point in time you're measuring something or what definition you're using, you can have all sorts of numbers and they might all be different, but they might all be valid, but we have to make sure we're all singing from the same songbook. The other function is reporting and sharing, and so it's responding to internal and external data requests, and we get a considerable number of these, as well as the periodic release of CIC data, both research and operational. This function, which predates the government's open data initiative, is now sort of under that same umbrella. The government's heading towards making all this information more and more accessible to the public. Also, some of you are probably familiar, the sort of flagship publication of the data group is Facts and Figures, but there's also a suite of projects that go with that. The other function that's pretty important and often not seen externally is the data development function. And this involves the development of new data sets, models, and tools that support policy, program, and evaluation needs. So there's a considerable amount of work that's done just to keep the engine running. Second function, and this is, these three functions, by the way, are not mutually exclusive. There's all sorts of overlap, etc. The director of the data monitoring and reporting group is a fellow called Dan DeCoker, who used to work at Statistics Canada. He's not here today. The second function is headed up by Justus, who is the Director of Strategic Research. And as you can see, this is more what I think most people understand a research shop to do, which is in-house research, both primary and secondary, and externally commissioned research. We, from time to time, have contracts with academics and research networks to do work for us. And also, research that's more on looking at where the gaps are and planning for the long term. So Martha is in fact the person that's responsible for developing our research plan. And finally, the other function, and that's the one that I head up, roughly speaking, is the research partnerships function. And it's pretty well self-explanatory, but immigration, there's very few departments, with the exception perhaps of Indian Affairs, and even there we have some common interests that don't have some sort of an immigration lens that they can put to their research. So we are in the process of building partnerships with other government departments where we have areas of shared interest, and there are some that are sort of no-brainers. Clearly, Statistics Canada, HRSDC, Heritage, Health, Public Safety, but the list could go on. The other thing that we call them partnerships, but in a sense, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that word. We work very closely with the policy branches, like integration, to try and work with them to identify their research needs. And it's really an acknowledgement that the research has to, in some cases, anticipate, but always keep pace with the needs of policy shops. Otherwise, it's not really a way to spend the taxpayers' money. Now, I'm going to hand over to Martha the next 3 slides. But let me explain the next 4 slides, rather. The heading at the top, these are really taken from the department's strategic objectives. And I'm going to preface this by saying this is the way that we organize the research in order to justify the money that we spend and the salaries that we pay, etc. But we recognize that the way the government is structured, the way CIC is structured, is not necessarily a mirror of the world that we study. So this is an example that I use sometimes. It was when I worked at HRSDC in the social policy research group. So I would just, the point I guess I'm trying to make is a single mother on social assistance does not wake up in the morning and say, I have an income security policy problem today. But sometimes, so this is why we've chosen these 3 groupings, because they mirror the way the department reports on what we do. Not because we don't recognize there are many different ways to lump or split the research. Anyway.
So with that in mind, I want to review 4 major thrusts of activities that align very much with the department's objectives. And for those of you who have read our act, affectionately known as the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, you will have seen these with slightly different wording. So we want to support immigration that will build a prosperous future for the country. And we do research that basically investigates how we can enhance the economic contribution of immigrants. So basically, the question that we're trying to answer when we undertake this research is, what is the appropriate level of immigration for Canada? And what are the implications of increasing overall levels? So this is an economic question in large measure. And to answer those questions, we are looking at a number of projects which look at economic outcomes based on the longitudinal immigration database. So the first one is an overview piece that we try to do every year. It looks at how immigrants are doing in terms of their earnings within the labor market. And it also investigates the same activity at a provincial level. But we also do we're doing a series of profiles which look at how immigrants who arrive in specific categories do in the labor market. And we also hope to look at other characteristics, not just immigrant landing category, but a lot of people ask us questions on a by-category basis. So how's the family class doing today is not an uncommon question. Or tell me about provincial nominees. So tell me about immigrant investors. So we need to stratify our work that way. We're also looking at a relatively new information source, which is the Labor Force Survey. Most of you know that a lot of StatCan stuff looks at established immigrants, recent immigrants, and very recent immigrants. But they're not parallel or comparable groups. Like, the age structure is very different. How long ago you landed puts you in a specific group. So if you look at, for example, the unemployment rate of one group over time, you may or may not be looking at a population that has the same socioeconomic characteristics. And what we're looking at is that, in fact, has a significant influence on the unemployment rate of a particular immigrant designation. The role of migrant labor supply. HRSTC does something called the Canadian Occupational Projection. And we like to look at that to say, well, how can immigrants complement future labor market needs? So we're looking at the supply implications of labor force. And also, we have commitments to our provincial research partners. So we have some commitments there that I'll come back to in just a second, particularly profiling immigrants in provincial and territorial labor markets. The next There's a good example on this slide which focuses on our family reunification and humanitarian responsibility of the department. We are in fact building an infrastructure which will facilitate a more thorough examination of the family sponsorship process. We're developing a data set which looks at who sponsors whom. So this is in large measure a data development activity. And we hope that this information will give us some information about mixed immigration, the category mix. But we are also doing some data development related to the IMDb in an effort to include not just individual income, but household income, family income. And we want to use that to explore poverty. That's a significant thrust, particularly related to family class and refugees, because predominantly the chronically poor are refugees, or in some cases the family class. We have done some work which you have all seen reported in the newspapers that supported Charlie Beach and Michael Abbott and Chris Warswick related to income distribution and earnings over time. They didn't just look at refugee cohorts, but that was one component of it. We're also looking, using the IMDb, about who moves who, where. And you, as interested in communities, you know that people don't stay in one place forever. Some people move, and you want to know about service provision as people move from A to B to C. The third slide is about integration. So the department has a commitment to strengthen our commitment to both integration and citizenship. And what we want to do is support policy options on the social inclusion front. This is kind of like mom and apple pie for citizenship and immigration. Key measures, key activities on the front. We have a contract with Paul Anisef, who's looking at the longitudinal survey of immigrants to Canada. He's looking at language proficiency of females. He's already done a beginning study, which is more comprehensive, but he felt that something on immigrant women needed to be explored in the data as well. But then, as Bruce pointed out, we're doing a lot of data development related to the integration milieu, if you will. If I use words like ICAMs or strategic outcome 3 indicators, things related to the general social survey, things related to world value survey, a number of things. We're doing a lot of performance measurement related activities, particularly in this domain. So the final slide, a healthy, safe and secure Canada. We don't do very much in this area, in fact. So it was a bit of a stretch to get 2 bullets on this slide, and I'm being straightforward. We do support our health branch with data support. So there is a project being run at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, trying to predict when TB will strike. I can get into that, and I'm sure Kevin, you'll want to correct me on that, but there's a project underway down there. And also what we're trying to do on the partnership side is work with other departments to sort of how we can work with them on this topic. So Bruce, I'll turn it back to you.
And going back to the last bullet on that slide, which you would have seen, in the context of what I do particularly, we do recognize that we hadn't really done a lot of work in this particular area, which is our 4th strategic objective in terms of the way our government operates, the way the department operates rather. So we are actually starting to build a pretty interesting partnership with public safety. And for those of you that don't know the public safety mandate, it's actually not just about terrorism and security. The research fellows over there are also interested in some broader social issues on inclusion and exclusion. So we hope to be able to do some pretty interesting work with them in future. The next slide is not that exciting. It's just a list of evaluations. Anna here from evaluation might want to go into
But the
greater
work
detail.
is exciting.
I meant because it's just a list, it's only in black and white. But you'll see we have published a number of evaluations this year, quite a number. So these are the ones that have recently been completed and posted. For those of you, again, that don't know, in 2009 there was a Treasury Court decision to report on all spending, direct spending. So the work of the evaluation branch has expanded a considerable amount. Within the evaluation function, of course, there's a research component, which is why research and evaluation are together. So the research that's undertaken where it's appropriate as part of these evaluations can involve analysis of the longitudinal immigrant database, the IMDb, or focus group testing, surveys, interviews, that kind of thing. So you may hear about some of these evaluations in your particular region, and this is where the research component is. So the next slide is essentially a list of the ones that are underway. And finally, the last slide, this is a list of the data that we make available to the public as part of the government's open data initiative. The other thing I'll mention, first of all, you'll see there's what we call the facts and figures suite. So generally in late February, we post on the internet preliminary estimates for immigration. Then in late August, the actual facts and figures report, which contains the final estimates, is available. There is a DVD-ROM digital library, which contains more or less the same information as facts and figures, and that's available on request. The provincial profiles are produced in late September, and that's just a different kind of cut of the data. And the permanent resident rounded data, interactive data cubes are produced in late October. And finally, every quarter of the year we post administrative data. This is something that's within the last year that our minister decided that he'd like to post data on the internet.